Hey everyone, welcome back to The Lonely Star. Scrolling through the news online, have you ever kind of stopped and wondered why you see one article and not another?
Mm.
Like what makes some stories pop up in the top of your feed while others just sort of fade into the background?
Yeah, I mean, we all know algorithms play a big part, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But what if it's more than just algorithms at work? What if there are, unseen forces kind of nudging you towards certain narratives?
That's a little unsettling when you put it like that.
I know, right? And here's a thought that might really get you thinking. Could the whole fight against so-called misinformation actually be a way of, limiting free speech?
Ooh, that's a deep one.
Yeah, it is. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. Some pretty concerning documents that have recently come to light. And they suggest that there might be government-backed efforts to shape what we see and hear online.
This isn't just like some internet conspiracy theory, though, right?
No, no, not at all. These
Yeah.
documents are the real deal. They came out because of a lawsuit by America First Legal AFL against the now-defunct U.S. Department of State's Global Engagement Center, the GEC for short.
So we're talking about official government documents obtained through legal channels.
Exactly. And today we're going to dig into what these documents reveal about the GEC, who they were working with, what they were actually doing, and what it all means for, our freedom of speech.
So the Global Engagement Center, the GEC, it sounds like something focused on, international affairs.
It does,
Yeah.
right? And initially it was actually set up to counter foreign disinformation targeting the U.S.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, countering foreign interference in our information space is generally seen as, a legitimate function of national security.
Right, but here's where things get a little murky. AFL's findings suggest that the GC might have strayed into the domestic arena, allegedly collaborating with private media organizations. Even the term state-sponsored propaganda has been thrown around.
Wow, that definitely raises some eyebrows. Where's the line between protecting the country and influencing its own citizens?
Exactly, and then there's this connection with USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, which usually focuses on international aid and promoting democracy. How do they fit into all of this?
Well, according to these documents, USA apparently had this internal disinformation primer that allegedly advocated for, and I quote, further censorship tactics by the private sector.
So essentially suggesting that private companies should be more involved in censoring content.
Yeah, which raises concerns about, government entities potentially pushing for more control over the information we see.
Right. And speaking of control, these documents reveal some really interesting details about alleged coordination on COVID-19 misinformation. There's this email exchange between the GEC's liaison planner to USAID and USAID itself.
Okay, so what do they talk about?
Well, the GEC apparently expressed a strong desire to sustain dialogue and connectivity with USAID, specifically to address COVID-19 misinformation.
But USAID's main focus is on international aid and democratic reforms, right? So why would they be so involved in addressing domestic misinformation about a health issue?
Exactly. It seems like a bit of a stretch from their core mission. And it wasn't just talk either. The documents point to actual collaboration on things like counter-propaganda efforts and various products related to disinformation and COVID-19. They even mention a demo of something called KHA-RON, which is described as a risk analysis program. And get this, they were monitoring narratives surrounding the 2020 elections in Moldova.
Moldova, why? Moldova, what does an election in Moldova have to do with domestic misinformation in the U.S.?
Right, it's a really good question, and it really makes you wonder about the true scope of these alleged operations.
It does make you think, are they just trying to understand how misinformation spreads, or is there something more to it?
Exactly, and speaking of connections, this is where things get even more intriguing. We're talking about alleged alliances with organizations like NewsGuard and Poynter.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of them. They rate the credibility of news sources and do fact-checking, right?
Right, and the documents released by AFL give us a glimpse into how these collaborations worked. There's this one email that really stands out. It's from NewsGuard's general manager, Matt Skibinski, and it was sent shortly after the 2020 U.S. election. And guess who was copied on the email? Christina Nemmer, a director at Park Advisors at the time.
Park Advisors, wait, I remember reading something about them. They received a pretty big cooperative agreement from the GEC, over $6 million, if I recall correctly.
You got it. And just to clarify, a cooperative agreement means that the government agency is really involved in the project. It's more than just giving them money. It suggests a closer working relationship and potentially more direct influence.
Okay, so what did Park Advisors do with that $6 million?
Well, they allegedly distributed subawards to a few different organizations, including NewsGuard, the Atlantic Council, and the Global Disinformation Index.
And the Global Disinformation Index, that rings a bell. Didn't they compile lists of websites, many of them conservative, and encourage advertising boycotts against them?
They did, and they're funded by George Soros. So think about it. Taxpayer money intended to counter foreign threats potentially went to an organization that was actively trying to defund certain news sources.
Wow, that's quite a chain of events, and the implications are huge, if true. We're talking about a domestic speech watchdog potentially funded by the very government it's supposed to be independent from.
Right. It's a lot to unpack. And then there's this disinfo cloud. What was that all about?
Well, from what I understand, it was an unclassified online platform used by several governments, not just the U.S., but also the EU, the UK, Australia, Estonia, you name it.
So a global network of sorts.
In a way, yeah, and they used it to counter what they considered adversarial propaganda and disinformation. And get this, the reported users included people from all sorts of government agencies like the State Department, the NSA, even parts of the Department of Defense, including U.S. Cyber Command.
So basically a shared online space for governments to keep tabs on information they deemed problematic.
Pretty much. And this is where things get even more concerning. The documents mention a GEC U.S. Cyber Command testbed pilot and something called NewsGuard's misinformation fingerprints.
Misinformation fingerprints. Is that some kind of spy tool?
Well, it's an AI tool designed to, analyze and rate websites based on their perceived level of misinformation.
It's like an automated fact checker?
Sort of, but a report from the House Small Business Committee raised a big red flag. There was apparently no firewall to prevent this technology from being used domestically.
So theoretically, it could be used to target American citizens and their online activity.
Exactly, and that's why the Foundation for Freedom Online has labeled NewsGuard as the enforcement arm of the censorship industry. A pretty harsh assessment, but given these revelations, it's not hard to see why.
And then there's Poynter, another organization involved in fact-checking and media literacy. The documents show an email connecting the GEC's monitoring and evaluation expert with someone from Poynter.
And AFL claims that Poynter is running a global false flag operation with international fact-checkers presenting themselves as independent but actually being funded by Poynter and potentially the GEC.
Right, and the email even mentions the GEC expert offering to walk Poynter through their new monitoring and evaluation workbook. It really suggests a close working relationship and a shared agenda.
So we're seeing this pattern emerge, right? A government entity originally focused on foreign threats, potentially getting involved in domestic activities, collaborating with, and even funding private organizations to monitor and possibly suppress certain types of speech.
And it doesn't stop there. The documents also show that they were sharing information with foreign governments.
Really? Like who?
Well, there's this email from January 8, 2021, just a few days after the events at the U.S. Capitol, and it shows the State Department sending alleged malinformation to UK government officials in the British FCDO.
And AFL says this isn't the first time they found evidence of coordination between pro-censorship groups and both the US and UK governments regarding the speech of American citizens.
It's all starting to feel a bit like a coordinated effort to control the narrative, right?
It does. And, stepping back and looking at all of this, it paints a pretty disturbing picture. We have the GEC, USAID, possibly foreign governments like the UK and private organizations all working together in ways that could potentially impact free speech and limit the diversity of viewpoints we're exposed to online.
So just to recap, we have allegations of a government agency exceeding its mandate, engaging in domestic activities, collaborating with private entities to potentially suppress speech, and even sharing information with foreign governments.
It's a tangled web, for sure, and as Andrew Block from America First Legal put it, this whole situation with USAID and the GEC and their alleged coordination with organizations like NewsGuard and Poynter represents a dangerous, unholy alliance when it comes to free speech. He stresses that even though the GEC has been shut down and some of USAID's actions are coming to light, lawmakers need to be incredibly careful as they craft future legislation in this area.
It really makes you think twice about the information you encounter online, doesn't it? Like, who's deciding what you see and why?
It does, and it raises a crucial question for all of us listening with the GEC gone. What's to stop similar initiatives from popping up, maybe under a different name or within a different agency? And in this increasingly complex digital world, how can we be sure we're getting unbiased information and not just what someone else wants us to see?
So keep asking questions, keep digging, keep learning. That's what The Lonely Star is all about. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.
Bye!